Hello, and welcome to On the Pitch, a Missouri soccer podcast and your home for all things Missouri soccer. I'm your host, Bridger Pretz, and I'll be bringing you the latest news, match analysis, interviews, and stories from every corner of the Missouri and American soccer scene. Whether you're up in St. Louis, Kansas City, Columbia, or anywhere in the Show Me State, this is where Missouri soccer lives. Let's get into it. This podcast is brought to you by LP Digital. LP Digital is a locally owned photography and videography business in Columbia, Missouri. It was started by University of Missouri journalism students Isaiah Lopez and Joseph Patton. Their mission is to bring local stories to life through stunning high-quality visuals that fit any budget. Because at LP Digital, everyone deserves to see themselves smile. Whether it's capturing life's biggest moments or telling your unique story, they're here to make it happen. Check them out on Instagram and Facebook at LP Digital 2026 and send them a message to find the perfect price for you. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the On the Pitch podcast with me, your host, Bridger Pretz, and my guest, Andy Barney. Andy, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Bridger.
Great. So for the people who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm 67 years old, and I've been around the block in terms of growing up in England playing soccer. Come from a really famous city called Oxford, where the famous university is, which was a wonderful place to grow up because it truly is a magnificent, ancient city.
Mm-hmm.
And the level of education there is extremely good, even if you don't go to college there. Because it would kind of be a black eye for Oxford University if the city had bad education and, you know, they had the best education in the world. So I got lucky in terms of being born there, growing up there. And I come from a soccer family. My uncle was, for 1 year after World War II, the number 10, if you like, played in the attacking central midfield for Napoli in Italy, where he had been fighting for the Allied forces against Germany right before the war ended. The family, I had two other uncles that played for Tottenham Hotspur. My father was primarily a boxer as a kid, but his mum made him give up boxing because his friend got killed in the ring.
Oh my gosh.
And so he started playing serious soccer, and he rose to a decent level of semi-professional play, but the whole family was soccer nuts.
Yeah.
And so, I just couldn't dodge that bullet. And I grew up absolutely infatuated with the game. And I started coaching at age 16, I think primarily because I was playing on semi-professional terms for a club called Oxford City that still exists to this day.
Mm-hmm.
And the chairman of Quarry Rovers had a bunch of 8-year-old boys that needed a coach. And I was getting my name in the paper every week. And so he equated, my background with the family and the fact that I was somewhat locally well known with an imaginary ability to coach kids. So I went along and this is a good story. I was taking a practice in the early days, and one of the kids had a really infamous father who was always getting in pub fights, and was a very fearsome guy,
Mm-hmm.
and he was known to have a screw loose. And during a drill that we were doing, the ball went out of play, and I said to his son, "Hey Brian, could you go and fetch the ball?" And he was angry at something that had happened and frustrated. And he turned around to me and he said, "F off, Mr. Barney." And in that moment, as a 16-year-old and rookie soccer coach, a vision of his father flashed into my mind. And so I said to him, "That's okay, Brian, I'll fetch it."
That's okay. I guess I'll get it.
Yeah.
Oh man! So you really started playing at 16. So you started coaching at 16. Is there a reason why you kind of chose the coaching route and not really the playing route, or?
Well, I went the playing route, and I had a decent semi-pro career, and then I went at age 23 back to college and ended up playing for the international team representing 4 countries the collegiate representative team for the British Isles, British colleges, as
Okay.
the first choice left fullback. Uh,
Nice.
so, I had 3 years in that position and playing at that level, and I'd been coming over every summer after I started attending college to run soccer camps and work at soccer camps. And as soon as I graduated after 3 years, I decided my future was in
Hmm.
America because I'd been offered a full-time job running an indoor soccer facility. It was the practice facility back in those days for the New York
Okay.
Arrows. And, a whole bunch of pretty famous soccer players used to come into the facility to train every day. And the Arrows played at the New York Coliseum, and they were a really good indoor team back in those days. One of the names you might recognize is Shep Messing.
Hmm.
He was the goalkeeper back
Okay.
in those days, and he was a part owner in that facility
Oh
that I
wow.
worked at. So, but then Shep and a couple of other partners got into a big fight, and the other partners decided not to continue being partners in Long
Hmm.
Island, and they moved to Kansas City. And when they moved, they asked me if I would like to come with them, and offered me a job. And in those days, I had an adventurous spirit that has gradually suffered the hits
Hmm.
of time. But in those days, I was full of adventure and decided, hey, let's go and see what Kansas City
Okay.
provides. It was a
Yeah.
fantastic
What
move.
what year was that when you officially moved here to Kansas City?
It was in
Okay.
1985.
Was there anything about the city that kind of just really made you realize I could build something here, or I think I'd really enjoy it? Was it the barbecue? Was it the people? Was it the Kansas City Chiefs? Like, what about the city really kind of just drew you in to make you want to make that leap here?
Back in those days, the young women.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I love the honesty. Did you meet your wife here?
Well, yes, a
Okay.
past
Okay.
wife.
All right. Well,
Yes.
great.
So, but also the current wife.
Mhm.
So both
Okay.
wives.
Okay. I like it. I like it. So that was say the year again. When was that when you came over? 1985. So,
1985.
not to age you at all, but I was not even born yet. So I was born in '94. So I'm a little bit younger than you. So I might have just made you feel really old there a little bit, but.
After this podcast is over.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. So okay, so you started off. You were coaching. So you came over with the Comets group. What was that like in the '80s with the indoor soccer? Because a lot of people, when I've heard a lot of stories about the old Steamers back in the day, the St. Louis Steamers, now the Ambush, and how basically indoor soccer was kind of all really America had there a little bit in the '90s until MLS decided, when NASL folded and then MLS decided to start up again. There was a weird little span in there for almost 15, 20 years where indoors kind of all America had. So kind of talk me through a little bit of what that was like, because obviously coming from England where soccer's so much part of the culture compared to coming here where it's really kind of it's this underground thing almost in a way. Tell me a little bit about how you adapted to that.
So, yeah, I came to Kansas City, knowing that there was going to be, about 8 or 9 months before we opened our indoor facility that we were building. That's All American Indoor Sports in
Hmm.
Lenexa, still there, and still running indoor soccer leagues, and that was my baby from the first spadeful of dirt, all the way through to opening, and for a number of years after that. And so when I first arrived in Kansas City, I walked into the Johnson County soccer office, and it was totally
Hmm.
mom and pop. And there was this wonderful lady there called Patty McTighe, and she only just retired from the Soccer Dome. She's been, working the bar at the Soccer Dome and doing all sorts of helpful jobs down there for many, many years. Patty is like Mrs. Kansas City Soccer, and I walked in, and and as I walked in, she said, "Do you referee?" and I said, well, that's why I came to see you. And she said, take a look at that wall. There's the whole of the schedule for the spring season laid out, and it was just about to begin. And she said, fill your name in wherever you want for the whole
Oh, wow.
season. So I needed
Mhm.
money because All American wasn't opening, and the owners, couldn't
Mhm.
afford to pay me until it opened in November. And so I filled out every single day all the way through the season, from the first game to
Oh
the
my
last
gosh.
game, absolutely no breaks.
Oh.
You know, and, and she watched me with interest. And of course, I had to let her know that I was a
Mhm.
qualified referee. And coming from phys ed school, I'd got my referee qualifications in England, and I'd actually got qualifications in just a host of sports. 14 actually. I was actually a basketball referee, but I'll put my hand on my heart and say, I've never refereed a game of basketball, and I don't
Yeah.
want to, because I haven't got
Oh
a
my
clue
gosh.
what I'm
I
doing.
cou I couldn't
Uh,
I couldn't do it either.
But what I'd done at phys ed school is I'd gotten all of these governing body
Mhm.
coaching awards. And so this was really intriguing to me, because in England the game was so established that you would have to work for decades and decades in order to get a foot in the door at a higher level in
Yeah.
terms of coaching. And so anyway, I took all these refereeing hours, and then what was interesting is I went over to the indoor facilities. There was an indoor facility over by Overland Park Soccer Complex on the other side of 135th Street, and there was another one in Olathe called Soccer City. And I went over to the indoor facilities, and when I got done with my outdoor soccer, which was from about 9 o'clock till about
Mhm.
5 o'clock, I went to the indoor facilities, and I refereed until
Oh my
midnight.
gosh.
And but I also had a morning shift from 6 a.m. until I had to leave to go to my outdoor games. So I was literally refereeing to make ends meet and earn enough money, to exist for the
Yeah.
rest of the week and pay rent on my new apartment. And so, but here's what was weird about Kansas City is it didn't have any outdoor
Mhm.
professional soccer, but it had the boarded
Yeah.
indoor game. And when I went to my first Comets game, I was enthralled because, the place was packed. There was nearly 16,000
Wow.
fans in Kemper, and it was a
Mhm.
party. The music coming on, and the
They
thumping
got the
music, and
dancers and all
how
that. Yeah.
cheerleaders. I'd never seen a cheerleader at a soccer
Mhm.
game before. You know, and so there was this fantastic hybrid of soccer in Kansas City, but there was no really high quality 11 on
Mhm.
11 soccer outdoors. The Spurs were long gone. And so all you had was the indoor game, but it had taken off, and the kids loved going to
Yeah.
Comets games. You know, and so and there was this vast demand that was starting to build because of the comets.
Mhm.
you know so it was really an intriguing scenario. And when I walked into the community, in no time at all I was asked to help out coaching on Kansas State select staff, because I had a Welsh FA prelim badge and a B license at that point in time. And it turned out that just with those two licenses, I was the highest qualified coach in
Oh,
Kansas
wow.
City. You know, and that's how young the game was in Kansas City. Is I never met anybody that had any more than those licenses when I
Mhm.
first arrived. And then within a couple of years, I added a USYSAA license, a USSFA license, and an NSCAA Advanced National Diploma, which is now United
Mhm.
Soccer Coaches. And so that, with all of the other coaching qualifications in tennis and badminton and swimming, sea proficiency, canoeing, there's just so many things, track
Yeah.
and field, rugby league. I've gotten so many coaching qualifications that I was asked to be director of coaching in the state of Kansas inside 4 months of arriving in Kansas
Wow.
City. That's how ridiculous it was, because anywhere in England that you went for a job with a similar
Mhm.
cachet, or you'd probably have to be working hard at the highest level for
Yeah.
30 years before you make it to
Yeah,
that
plus you
level.
have so many, there's so many big names now that they'll play in the Premier League or even have a really good championship career, and then they're getting into coaching. So not only like you may know the game really well and be an absolute amazing coach, but not only that, you're having to compete against retired players who have these big CVs of their resume. They played for Man United or they played for whoever, and then you also have to compete there. So do you think do you think it's a good thing or I guess a bad thing at all when it comes to, international coaches coming over here and taking I shouldn't say taking, but they are applying and they're getting these, soccer jobs here in America. Do you see that as a positive for coaching here in America, or do you kind of see it as more of a detriment that we're not developing coaches like American coaches?
Oh, there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
in that question. And I'm this foreign coach that in many ways I actually see the influx of foreign coaches into the American game in some ways as a negative. And let me explain,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm from England, obviously. um, you know the the English coaches that I know that have come to the United States um, have a very passing oriented approach to
Okay.
the game. So and because they're so oriented towards passing, and unfortunately, when I first started coaching in England, coaching was actually more on game day oriented towards the long ball game. So not even an intelligent
Mm-hmm.
passing game. It was more of a drive it 60 yards
Yeah.
to try and hit the
Super direct.
striker.
Yeah.
It's super, and then other players would run off of the guy that was good in the air, and he would try and head it down to somebody that was
Mm-hmm.
breaking through. And there was a whole movement of coaching in those days that it was headed by a guy called Charles Hughes, who became, I would say, infamous for that
Mm-hmm.
philosophy. And he was one of the national directors of coaching.
Mm-hmm.
And wrote books. And so I think there were many coaches that based their coaching on that philosophy because it helped them to
Yeah.
win quickly,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. So when I came to Kansas City, there weren't that many British coaches, and the coaches that were knowledgeable in the main came from other places. That there was the best known boys club at the time was the Junior
Mm-hmm.
Comets, and Knox, who started the Junior Comets, came from St. Louis. And so most people that were coaching in the community were
Mm-hmm.
imports. And there weren't that many English imports coaching in the community. A few came in with the Comets and did some coaching for a while, but not too many of them
Mm-hmm.
lasted. The most famous of them would have been Gordon Hill, who played for Manchester United
Yeah.
in England. And then probably the next most famous would have been Stan Cummings. Was an England, I think, under 21 international who played for
Mm-hmm.
Sunderland during his pro career. And so these were good guys. I became friends with all of these guys, but there wasn't a great English influence. There was actually just as much in those days Brazilian influence, which I think was pretty good. There's a guy who played for the Spurs called Eli Durante, and he was coaching in the community, and a whole bunch of other Brazilians that had found their way into the community because of soccer.
Yeah.
So and gradually after running All American for 5 years, I moved into actually starting the Legends Soccer Club. And at that point in time, virtually all of the coaches in the community were ex-Comets players, and a number of guys that I'd brought into the community, like Hugh Williams, who was the coach of the Kansas City Current, an assistant coach of FC Casey, Doug McLagan, who was an assistant coach to the Comets. Those are two guys that I brought over here that I went to college with in England. And and there's been a bunch of other guys similar to Hugh and Dougie that have come into the community, and made most of their living for a long time out of soccer coaching. And
Hmm.
um, and but the great influx though of coaches to Kansas City that I believe started the path of Kansas City, towards being a USA powerhouse city in soccer. And I don't know if you know this, but it's by far the smallest city to earn soccer games for the World Cup that's upcoming next year.
Really? I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
it's by far the smallest city that got games. And one of the reasons is that back in the day, in the 1980s, I started initially what was called All American Soccer Camps, but within a year we changed it to British Soccer Camps, and now it's known as Challenger Sports Camps.
Oh my gosh, I did one of those when I was a kid.
Did
I
you
did.
really?
I did. So, do you know where Moberly, Missouri is? It's north of Columbia, Missouri.
I looked it up when you invited me on the
Okay,
podcast.
okay. So that's where I grew up at. I guess they did one when I was, oh man, I had to be 6 or 7. So it would have been, that would have been 2000, year like 2000, 2001, 2002 ish, maybe even before that. Maybe it was still in the 90s. But I swear I did one of those Challenger Cups or Challenger camps because they did one in Moberly because I still have the ball or it's somewhere in my mom and dad's basement, but they still have it.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it as much as a fourth or fifth, like a 4 or 5 year old did. So funny enough, I actually was kind of a really weird kid growing up. I hated sports until oh my gosh, it's so funny how this actually circles around. So I actually hated sports really until I got to about my freshman year of high school. My mom and dad took us to a Comets game. And I was playing American football at the time as a freshman. I had quit soccer around um, I guess around 12, 13 years old. I quit it, started playing American football with my buddies because it was at school. Played my freshman year of high school. My mom and dad took me and my brother to a Comets game. My brother played soccer all 4 years of high school. But in the middle of that game, my brother was totally not even like interested in the Comets. He thought it was kind of lame, wasn't into it. But me, a kid who I completely just didn't even care about soccer, I fell in love with it. Like after going to a Comets game, I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And since then, I went to the football coach the next day. I quit the football team and I went right back to soccer. So the Comets helped me fall back in love with soccer because it was so different, because it was so cool and it was so fast paced and there was so much going. It was literally like you said earlier, it was a party. I didn't feel like I was even at a sporting event. It felt like I was at a carnival. It was amazing. So yeah, but I do remember that Challenger camp when I was a kid.
Yeah, I would just make phone calls. I'd find out who the president was of the local rec club,
Hmm.
and I would make phone calls and talk to the president. And in those days, nobody had approached these guys to run camps.
Yeah.
You know, and I would guarantee them an all British coaching staff. And then I would go back to England. With let's say 20 camps in my pocket. Contracts for 20 camps. And I would hire the coaches that were needed. To run those 20 camps.
Hmm.
And they'd come over for the summer. We'd travel around running camps. And then they would disappear back to England. And so this is kind of interesting because what happened was, when I say they would disappear back to England, a lot of them actually stayed.
Yeah.
Because they were offered coaching jobs, or they met a girl and they fell in love, and so what happened to Kansas City, it became the biggest expat British soccer coaching community in North America.
Okay.
And to this day now there's probably 200 British coaches involved with youth soccer in the Kansas City area in,
Wow.
in some form or another. And you'll find that 95% of them came here through British soccer.
Wow.
Because this was the jumping off point for what became the biggest camp company in the nation, and is still to this day the biggest camp company in the nation.
Wow.
So that was my baby. That was something
Yeah.
that I started, and I never owned it. I just started it and ran it for the guys that, the investors
Hmm.
that had the money, and was just happy to have a soccer job. you
Yeah.
know, but it's certainly provided a wonderful legacy, to American children, because for the first time ever, kids all over the country were able to get a reasonably highly qualified player coach that was also usually a phys ed qualified teacher,
Hmm.
to actually come to their community and run camps during the summer.
Yeah.
You
So my dad was actually the president of the Moberly Area Soccer Association. So I'm sure long time ago you probably had a phone call or you contacted somebody that was related to me back in the day. So
know, that
but that's amazing. Small world, but I would hate to paint it, you know. So, couple of topics that I really want to go over with you. The first thing is I want to talk about this book. We kind of were talking about it a little bit off air. For the people that can't see it, that is Training Soccer Legends, and this is one of your books. And you were actually telling me something a little crazy about it. That you've kind of had AI dissect it, but before you go into that a little bit, tell us about what made you want to write a book and made you want to spread the knowledge of everything that you've encompassed over the last, what seems like now 20, 30, almost 40 years now of coaching. What made you want to write a book to share that knowledge out there?
Well, our club does just about everything incredibly differently from the rest of the clubs in soccer nationwide, and of course in Kansas City, and we've got incredibly good reasons for having a completely different philosophy to the rest of the clubs, and it's all about child development.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's going to listen to that and say, "Oh, we've heard this story before. It's just a variation on a theme."
Yeah, every coach says that they develop kids.
Yeah, and the reality is that most coaches follow a pattern that's been established that focuses on winning games,
Mm-hmm.
with unequal playing time, and with a skill base that is more designed not to lose than it is to build incredibly creative players that can help their team win on a consistent basis, at the highest level.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of people don't realize that in order to develop a great player, you have to actually emulate the upbringings of the great players. And people say to me that that I've got this newfangled idea about soccer coaching, and it couldn't be less true, because what we do is actually has been proven all over the world to be the root of the great player to their fame and fortune. And let me explain that. Is that people will say that you're going against the coaching schools of the United States Youth Soccer Association. When you say that we should be focused on deceptive dribbling and goal scoring, you know, and I say to them, yes, I am. I fully agree with that, because I don't agree with their methodologies. Because I used to lecture in physical education, and I've got all these qualifications, and I've spent decades realizing and understanding, and of course in practical ways proving that if we can focus on the most creative skills, and if we can focus on incredible deceptive dribbling skills and incredible finishing skills, we actually develop players that are vastly better than coaches that focus on passing skills and receiving skills, which are the other two core skills of the game. And they say, look, we're not interested in your, in your, new unproven ideas. And that makes me chuckle, because um, our philosophy is purely and simply stolen from the background of all the world's greatest players.
Mm-hmm.
So if you look into the background of Leo Messi, uh, Leo Messi grew up in a small town. It was either Villa Fiorito or Rosario. I think it was
I
Rosario.
think it's Rosario too. Yeah.
Yeah, and Maradona was the one that grew up in Villa Fiorito. and which is more of a slum than Rosario. But Rosario is no oil painting. But Leo grew up in a house that it was a soccer family. His brothers played. His father was a player when he was younger. They were totally enthusiastic about the game, and so they bought little Leo a ball when he was just a toddler. Literally only able to walk. They gave him this little ball, and his mother and his grandmother put him out in a little patio on the side of their house that had a concrete wall at one end, wooden house siding, heavy wooden house siding with a heavy kitchen door in it on one side, a wrought iron fence on the other side, and another concrete wall at the other end. And little Leo, for hours a day, just hit shots in that area. And the ball couldn't go anywhere, and he couldn't go anywhere because, the gate was locked. So he couldn't walk out into the street, couldn't get through the wrought iron fence bars, so he was safe, and in the book, The Flea About His Life, the mum and the grandmother are in the kitchen, and they're talking about something, and little Leo with his new ball they just bought him, and there's a few paragraphs where they're describing the constant soundtrack of their life, which was thump 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 from Leo Messi hitting his shots, and this is what's interesting, is that nobody in those in those days cared too much about making a player two-footed. Things happen just organically in coaching. And coaching was young. If anybody did focus on anything, it was to create a two-footed player. But that's total baloney, because every single great player that I've studied and I've tracked their background was incredibly one-footed.
Yeah.
And during their formative years, spent virtually no time developing the wooden leg, the other foot. Now, interestingly enough, in Leo Messi's little box soccer court, because that's what we call it, and we've got in our facilities in Kansas City over 100 box soccer courts. In those box soccer courts, which have almost an exact but better carbon copy of what Leo Messi had, because it's surrounded on four sides by 8-foot walls. There's no way that the ball can get out or escape. And in that environment, you shoot and you shoot and you shoot, and the ball comes back to you so fast because they're so small that there's no reaction time, and you can't run around the ball. So you take shots with both feet. We don't tell our players take them with both feet. There's just no alternative. So what we find is we completely outshoot any other club, with this philosophy, so that kids walk out of our practices. And I'm going to give you an example. Our record is held by Riley Smith, who's just in her senior year at Missouri State. They won the regional championship last year, I think for the first time ever. And Riley's a striker. Most of our players, play further up the field than usual because of the dribbling and finishing skills that we develop. But they're also great defenders, and so Riley, in 1.5 hours, and let me break it down for you. It's 15 rounds of box soccer, court to herself. All our players, we've got enough courts that we give them a court to themselves most of the time. Although we do have a 2-person game if we need to do that. In 1 hour, Riley did 15 rounds of box soccer shooting, 4 minutes around, and her total number of shots that she took was 1,474 shots. That is ungodly.
I bet you couldn't find a high school coach anywhere in the state of Missouri that one of their players even has that many shots combined in an entire season, counting practice. There's no way. If they're just outside doing their normal drills, line up, shoot, nobody's getting to 1,400 shots. And that's just unbelievable.
But remember, this is in one 90-minute practice. And I've actually sat in various scenarios and gone to various practices. People that didn't even know me, I'll just sit there in the stands, and it's cold, and I've got my hood up, and I'm counting shots.
Yeah.
And the average that I've come up with is about 50 when people are working on shooting in a practice. 50 versus 1474.
Oh my gosh.
And this rubbishes the 10,000 hour rule,
Yeah.
because if the average is 50, and you do 10,000 hours of 50, then you're getting a small fraction, as opposed to if you do 10,000 hours of 1,000 shots an hour. It's 20 times greater.
Yeah.
The repetition factor that you can get if you become elite in our facilities. But it's probably 20 times greater all the way down, for the novices, for the ones that are at the median,
Yeah.
their developmental cycle.
Well, yeah. Well, I could even kind of attest to some of that too, because I trained the goalies there at Park Hill South. I was a goalie coach for a long time when I was at Fulton before I became a head coach. And I will tell you, from day one of coaching goalies to after 3 or 4 years, my shot improved because I was training my shooting so much more because I was training the goalies. So just me shooting every day, multiple 30, 40, 50, 60, sometimes I'll have, depending on the amount of keepers, depending on the reps, they'll go through 5, 6, 7, 8 shots in one little session, one rep. So I'm probably getting like 100 to 200 reps, a practice. All of a sudden, now I'm 30 and I have the best shot I've ever had in my life. Like, if I could take what I can do now with the ball and put me back in high school, I would have been an all-state striker. But because I was, I didn't practice as much. I was a goalie in high school, so I wasn't practicing my shooting. But now that I'm older, it totally counts. It totally makes sense because I can shoot better than some of the high school kids just because I'm doing it more and I'm getting more reps at it.
So I've got a couple of stories for you. When I was a kid, my parents bought the house next door. My dad renovated it, and they opened it as a boarding house. And so, from when I was a tiny kid, we always had somewhere between 4 and 10 lodgers, staying in the boarding house, who came over to our house to eat breakfast, dinner, and lunch. And so I would play them at night after 6 o'clock when there was no kiddie programs on TV, and I didn't watch much TV anyway because I was always out playing soccer over the recreation ground, which literally backed up to my house. So I could be on the recreation ground in 10 seconds if I sprinted from the back door. And because my dad illegally cut a hole in the fence so I didn't have to walk a mile around to the end. So anyway, I used to play soccer up until it got dark outside, and then I went inside, and all the lodgers came to our house because we only had one TV license, and the TV was in our lounge in the house that we lived in, that the lodgers came to eat and recreate in. So I would walk in from playing soccer over the recreation ground behind my house, and when I was a little kid, one of the lodgers had taught me how to play chess. And so I would grab my chess pieces and my board, and I would challenge any one of the lodgers to a game. And and this was Oxford, England. We had lots of people associated with the university, and it seemed that just about everybody played chess.
Yeah.
And for years, I was just a little kid, and they wiped the floor with me. But I got better and better and better. And what was interesting is that when I was about 21, I started popping cartilages, and I had 3 knee operations. And I was in recovery from one of those operations because they kept you in those days because of the risk of septicity. So they wheeled a guy in after a couple of days after I'd been there, and I still had another 10 days to go before they were going to discharge me. And after the guy came out of the anesthetic, he said to me, and he was a posh guy. He was, what we in the working classes in England called at the time a hooray Henry. Hello, Roger, And he said, hey, old man, and us working class kids didn't.
Listen here, old chap.
Yes, we didn't. It was like old man and old boy, It was like, hello, mate, and so he said, hey, old man, do you play chess? And I said, yeah, I love to play. And he said, oh, wonderful. He said, would you care for a match? And so, he set up the pieces and we played, and it went right down to the wire, and I beat him. And so he got angry. And I'm looking at him like, this guy's a bit nuts,
Yeah.
and he said, would you care to play again? And I said, sure, and I picked him at the post again. Great games. And at
Yeah.
this, remember, I'd been playing chess for 15 years since I was about age 5, in this boarding house environment, night after night after night. And so he got really angry again when I beat him again. And in full disclosure, after that, he beat me 60% of the time. So I got a bit lucky maybe the first 2 games, but after he got angry again, I said to him, "Do you mind me asking why are you getting so angry over a stupid game of chess?" Because I'd never played chess
Mm-hmm.
outside of my boarding house environment. I'd always thought about going out for the school chess team, but I was too busy playing sports. I played like 6, 7, 8 sports for the school teams, and that was me. I was an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't particularly a great student, because I was always doing other stuff rather than studying, and one of those things that I was always doing, rather than studying, was chess, and I said, can you tell me why you're getting so upset over a stupid game of chess? I thought they were good games, and I thought you played well. And he said, well, old boy, he said, I'm the Oxford University chess captain. Now, I'm not story to blow my own trumpet.
Yeah.
I'm telling this story, and I've actually got a report from my school, a leavers report, with boxes that are checked for all of the things you do for the school.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got checks by played rugby for the school team, played field hockey for the school team. They didn't have soccer because that was a blue collar sport, so
Mm-hmm.
I was a pleb. And so I played my soccer outside of school, and but the school was too posh to play soccer.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been lower in their standards. I ran cross country for the school. I did like 7 events on sports days, and I was state champion in the 800 meters, and the list goes on and on. I played badminton at the school. I was tennis captain, and and so I had all of these things, and this is all reflected on this list. And there's a big goose egg when it comes to chess, and it's because I didn't have any time to play chess.
Yeah.
Had I have had an hour spare that I wasn't, doing a sport, I would have enrolled in the chess club.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that I never knew I was any good at chess.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You were just used to, you're playing it at night just for fun with, those people that were staying at your parents' house. You weren't playing like competitive games. There wasn't any drama or pressure with it. You were just learning by doing. And then come to find out you were doing really well.
Well, and the other thing was that, because I was the little kid that lived in the house that these people were staying with, they coached me.
Mm-hmm.
And a whole bunch of them were really good chess players. I realize now, and, they showed me obviously the Queen's Gambit. They showed me all of the things that I should have known,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of standard chess practice,
Yeah.
because a lot of these people, were chess players,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the pastime of choice for the aristocracy, if you
Yeah.
like, when I was growing up, but, this is one of the reasons why I've created for the Legends Club exclusively indoor practice environments, and just to give you just one little advantage of our club, is that we surround everything with rebound walls so that none of our players ever have to chase an errant shot and waste a minute retrieving a ball from 40 yards behind the goal.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I've wasted probably about hours of my life having to tell kids to go pick up balls because they can't shoot it on target.
In every soccer practice I've ever seen outdoors, the vast majority of the time is spent retrieving balls instead of shooting balls.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really important because in our facility, the vast majority of time is flipped and it's spent shooting balls rather than retrieving balls.
Mm-hmm.
And just that one little simple thing, and we got 1,000 innovations in our coaching philosophy and in our facilities, and we're planning even more.
Yeah.
And so, we've got all of these innovations that don't give kids any alternative but to be great finishers and great deceptive dribblers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then people say to us, well, what about passing? You know, and it blows my mind that people can't put two and two together and understand that a great goal scoring shot is nothing but the most accurate, powerful pass.
Yeah.
And you've got the ability from 25 yards out to bend the ball around the wall into the top corner of the net. Passing is a walk in the park.
Yeah.
And so shooting is a 2-for-1 skill. While you're shooting, you're developing great passing ability. And of course, shooting is vastly more pressured than passing because the defenders will axe murder you to stop you scoring. So what you're doing is you're not only developing, you know, a much more difficult release skill, shooting, but you're also developing the ability to handle defensive pressure, you know, if that is the main focus of the team or the club you play for, which it is Legends Club. You know, and I don't know of any other club that makes that the major focus, you know, across the nation. So, you know, I do believe that we're exclusive. I don't know of another club that has copied our box soccer concept, and we've had it for 15 years. You know, and it's, you know, right now we've got, you know, Mary Long playing for the Kansas City Current, you know, who just finished third place, you know, the year before last in the World Cup. You know, we've got JC Hackler that's on the women's national team. You know, and guess what? Our players are the best players on the team. They're number 9s, they're the number 10s. Both of those players I just mentioned on the national team are number 9s. You know, they lead the attack. They're the ones that, you know, if, you know, Mary is a professional player now, and Jackie is on the Kansas City Current 2 team and will be a professional player. She just signed for KU, and the NIL package she got is outrageous. So, you know, it's just, you know, it blew my mind when I heard the package she got from KU. And so, you know, if we're going to build players, why aren't we trying to build great ball strikers? Why aren't we trying to build goal scorers? Why are we happy just, you know, developing a player that can hit an average power accurate pass? You know, and all our players can do that in their sleep, you know, but you know, our players can also bend a ball around the wall into the corner of the net on a free kick, or hit a ball first time on the volley with dropping or bouncing ball, you know, and put it, you know, right inside the post. You know, and that's because they've spent, you know, so many hours in the box soccer court. So if you don't believe me, and I'm going to tell you a story about my own daughter here. So right before her freshman year in high school, we had a weekend off, which never happened because I coached her team, you know, and so we both had a weekend off. And so, you know, I wasn't happy with that. So I needed,
no days off. No days off.
I needed my soccer fix.
Yeah.
So, you know, I decided to find a way to get my soccer fix, and coerce her into participating in something. So I discovered that in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, there was a futsal tryout that if you got selected at this tryout, you would come back to Kansas City, to JUCO, and it would be the final tryout from which the USA national futsal teams would be selected to go to Colombia and play international competition in the summer. You know, this year that program was in Argentina. They just got back from Argentina. So they've been doing every year, picking national teams from all the players that play football across the nation, you know, and taking them to some exotic venue where they can get good competition and represent the USA, the best players in the USA that they could. So I said to my daughter, "You want to go on a road trip? There's a really good museum in Milwaukee. You know, we can go to down to the lake and walk the beach, and you know,
and there's a soccer tryout."
and she looked at me, and I was just going to say that. She looked at me and she said, "What's the soccer angle, Dad?" so I said, "Well, there just might be a futsal tryout." So anyway, we had a conversation, and she agreed to go, and she did really well. And the guy that was running the tryout offered me a chance to play for the Comets Pro in the early 1990s. His name's Keith Tozer, and he was the Comets coach in the early 90s. Actually, the attack coach when they went from being Comets to attack. And
Okay.
and so Keith, after the tryout, Holly went up and thanked him because I always made sure that she did that whenever a coach helped her, and she said, and Mr. Tozer, thank you, but can you let me know what you thought, how you thought I did and what I should be working on, and he said, Holly, he said, you were marvelous. He said, that your dribbling skills, your finishing skills, he said, just absolutely superlative. He said, so you're definitely going to be invited to the final tryout. And so we go to the final tryout, which was actually after the high school season. It was in the early summer, and it was at Johnson County Community College. And so Holly participated. I thought she did pretty well. And they said at the end of the tryout, in 2 weeks, check the website because the national teams will be posted. She wasn't on the national team. So she was a little disappointed, but, she rebounds pretty quickly because she's been kicked so many times when she's dribbling and has, been persecuted as that target player on the other team that people are trying to, stop by hook or by crook. And so, a couple of weeks go by and we get a call from the national administrator, and she says, is Holly coming with us to South America or not, to Colombia? And I said, well, she wasn't on the roster. And the lady said, there's something more to this. She said, what birth year is she? And I said, 2003. And she checked and she said, oh, we're really sorry, but she actually made the 2002 roster, playing a year up.
Oh, nice.
So we hadn't checked that roster, obviously, because she's the only player that they picked to play up. And they picked her to play the pivot,
okay.
which is, the fulcrum,
the
central midfielder.
Yeah.
Basically,
the 10 in pretty much the 10, the person who runs the gambit. Yeah.
Marta.
Yeah.
Who I just got to see, the only time I've seen her, play at the current game the other night. And incidentally, the best player on the field was Hayley McCutcheon, and she used to be a Legends player. She plays for Orlando. And if you get the chance to watch the game, watch how she bosses the midfield, and you will understand why Kansas City didn't score, because they cut off Tenwa Chewinga's supply, and Hayley was the number one player that was cutting off the supply. But also, when she won the ball, she did amazingly creative and productive things with it. But we were teaching this stuff all the way back then when she was a kid, and she's now 30 years old, and she's had a fantastic pro career and actually played for the US national team. So this is not a new thing for the Legends Club, developing national team players. And so let's get back to the Holly story, because this just blew my mind. So we fly down to Medellin in Colombia, and we're in this 4,000-seater stadium getting ready for the first game. The girls are in their USA uniforms, beautiful uniforms, and they line up. The national anthems are playing, and so the referee blows the whistle. The game starts, and it struck me. This was the first game of futsal that Holly had ever played. I kid you not. She didn't know.
Oh my! What? So the tryout wasn't? It was outdoors. The tryout wasn't even indoors.
It was indoors.
Oh, okay, like in their gym or something, or
they had a tryout in Milwaukee that was in a school with a gym that had two basketball courts back to back.
Gotcha.
That they turned into futsal fields.
Yeah.
And at JUCO, they've got a field house.
Okay.
With a I believe a running track around it.
Yeah.
Inside the running track, there's 3 areas that they turn into futsal courts.
Yeah.
For the final national team tryouts.
Yeah.
And so this is what's incredible to me, because the futsal ball is a 40% bounce ball of a real soccer ball. So it's heavy and it's dull. So it discourages players from shooting from distance.
Yeah.
Holly was too stupid to know that. So she scored a lot of goals from distance.
There you go.
Because she was prepared to pull the trigger.
Yeah.
And this came, I think, as a surprise to the goalkeepers, because they don't usually face
Mm-hmm.
balls from significantly outside the arc, that
Mm-hmm.
determines the goalkeeper area in
Yeah.
futsal. And so and here's the other thing: a regular ball on occasion, even though she was really really good at deceptive dribbling, on occasion, like always happens, it would get away from her on occasion. It never did with a futsal ball.
Yeah. No, it stays. Yeah.
So it was 40% of the bounce, so 60% less likely to
Mm-hmm.
escape her dribbling clutches. So
Oh
she
my gosh.
almost never lost the ball when she was dribbling.
Mm-hmm.
She's doing a version of the Maradona turn that my eldest daughter actually invented, called the drag Maradona.
Mm-hmm.
The defenders get nowhere near these drag Maradonas, because they've never seen them before, and it doesn't matter whether you have or you haven't, because
Mm-hmm.
and this is getting advanced coaching. But what I've discovered over the last couple of years is the secret to the hidden balls trick in baseball is
Mm-hmm.
survival response that makes us as humans see the ball's travel path for an extra fraction of a second that can equate to 6 yards of travel in the mind's eye. And this has been built up as a survival response because there's not enough time for the brain to take in the messages through the eyes, process the messages, come up with the right solution, and then tell the working muscle and the bones and the ligaments and everything to work together, to overcome the threat of being killed by an animal.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a survival response, and what I've realized is when you teach a player, how to do a drag Maradona, you trigger a survival response, which is similar to the hidden ball trick in baseball. When somebody pretends to throw the ball to a base and palms it and hides it,
Mm-hmm.
then tags a runner out with it.
Yeah.
And this has fooled whole stadium crowds. you know
Yeah.
all the umpires, the other team, you know
Yeah.
everybody, because we in our minds see this danger signal, which is a throw in baseball, or it's a drag Maradona, or
Mm-hmm.
point, stare and shout before we do a puskas. And we actually step yards in that direction on occasion, because there's this wonderful pre-fake that triggers the survival response.
Yeah.
That's going to sound like gobbledygook to a lot of people, but
I understand what you're saying, because you'll see the camera will sometimes pan a little bit because they think that it's going to happen, and then when they pull it back, then the camera has to redirect because they saw it coming, but then the person changes. I
it, all,
totally get what you're saying.
all you've got to do is dial in the hidden ball trick to YouTube,
Yeah, yeah.
and you
We
will.
tried it when I was a kid. It didn't work. We wound up messing up when I was a kid playing baseball. But I know what you're saying.
So we selected moves for our Maestro series, our deceptive dribbling series, to leverage to the maximum, this whole hidden ball trick concept,
Mm-hmm.
survival concept. And what's really interesting is I have a clip of Holly playing in high school against one of her teammates from the Legends Club, and this teammate had been destroyed, as well as all of Holly's teammates had been destroyed by Holly's drag Maradona 1,000 times in practice,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so now we're in high school and they're facing each other, and Holly does it to her again, and for the 1,001st time, it worked again.
Yeah.
And left her completely stranded. And the funny thing was that the other coaches in high school would double team Holly. And
Mm-hmm.
so there were two players that were marking Holly. And this is something I wish I could make available to, the audience here that's listening to this podcast, because it's just fascinating, is both players are exactly in unison in what they're doing in response to Holly's pre-fake,
Mm-hmm.
that trigger to the survival response
Yeah.
that she uses when she drags the ball in a certain direction before doing the Maradona turn, hence the name drag Maradona.
Yeah.
And so the drag forces the defender to turn their body, turn their hips, and take a stride in the wrong direction. And then with the next touch, he begins the Maradona turn. And this clip is hilarious because as she completes the Maradona turn, the two girls she is playing against, one being her teammate,
Mm-hmm.
Are literally facing the wrong way, looking over their shoulder, at her as she goes away from them.
Yeah.
And they both are in exactly the same position for the whole time she is dragging the ball in the direction she's not going and then pulling the ball back to go the other way. They are both in exactly the same position. And so, when I looked at that clip, I thought, well, wow, you really are, if you do this the right way as a dribbler, in total control of the defender.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're taking the defender and putting them where you want them to be, where they're going to be a complete sucker when you actually do the Maradona turn.
Absolutely.
And this is the fascinating thing, is that the pro game hasn't picked up on this.
Yeah.
We are a world first. I can't find this anywhere in the world in English, anything that describes anything similar. And I've done so many searches, to try and find this theory encapsulated in, soccer dribbling move training.
Mm-hmm.
So people just don't get this. They've not related the survival response. And for people that don't think there's a survival response, why is it then that a baby immediately after they're born, suckles towards the nipple? They don't even know what a nipple is. They've been in the womb. They've been fed through the umbilical cord.
Yeah.
And yet they instantly, as soon as they're picked up by the mother, the baby's mouth starts moving towards the nipple.
I don't know. I don't know why that is.
Yeah,
it's a survival instinct, I guess.
Well, duh.
They got to eat, man. Survival.
You don't last long if you don't eat, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you alluded to it here a little bit. You talked about the Maestro series. Will you kind of go tell me a little bit about that? Because I know I've heard a lot of it because I'm part of the Legends Club, so I've gone through it. But for the people that don't know, you had mentioned the Maestro series. Will you go a little bit into kind of a little bit of a detail, just to kind of mention that, talk about that a little bit?
Let me start at the beginning, because when I started the Legends Club, I taught probably 35 moves going both ways. And there's no doubt it created fast footwork in my players. But here's the problem. It didn't create a rocket fast movement pattern with the most effective moves, because it was too broad. So what I was doing is I was dipping my toe in the developmental water, for very briefly, just to show the kids, hey, this is a triangle you can do with your feet to build fast footwork, but there was nothing deceptive about this triangle, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so over time, I realized that, number one, two-footedness and the need to be two-footed is an absolute myth, which we've already touched on to some degree, but in my books I touch on to a much greater degree, and this is something that when I had this revelation, I took this to Anson Dorrance, the head coach at North Carolina, who was the women's national coach when the women won their first World Cup. And Anson Dorrance, dug into this with me, and Anson agreed that what we had developed was a new way of looking at the game. But then he shared with me one of the things that allowed him to win all those NCAA Division I championships, because he won 22, and he's still involved there and was part of the winning of number 23 last year, even though Damon Nahas is the head coach.
Mm-hmm.
Anson, he introduced me to the margin of greatness concept. Are you familiar with the margin of greatness concept?
I actually am not.
So the margin of greatness concept is kind of intriguing, because what we will find is when a coach shows us how to do something that we decide we're going to practice intensely on. When we first start practicing on something that has been newly introduced to us, we make rapid gains. If we take it seriously, we get better really quick. But
Mm-hmm.
then the gains start to slow down.
Yeah.
And as we spend more and more time, our gains become smaller every practice session until they become truly incremental. And maybe some sessions, when you leave practice, you think to yourself, I got worse this practice, not better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the skill development process. Anson's theory is if you ever get to the point where you're saying to yourself, this practice, I got worse, that's wonderful because you've reached the margin of greatness phase.
Yeah. Okay, that makes more sense now.
So, and this is best depicted as you're on a rocket ship to start. So look at a graph, and the graph goes steeply upwards and slightly to the right. But as you get more and more into learning the skill, the graph starts to even up. And the line changes from more vertical to more horizontal, and gradually, there's less of a steep climb to the graph line, until it's virtually flat. And Anson said that's where the great players go, because they go to the margin of greatness, and from Anson telling me about the margin of greatness, concept, and saying how much what we were doing actually leverages the margin of greatness concept. I've used his concept to refine many, many different types of skill trainings that we do. Different moves, for example, or shooting techniques, because it's all about intense repetition so that you can get to be able to handle that repetition under pressure in the game scenario, in the penalty, where angels fear to tread, right in the goal mouth, with the Champions League on the line or the World Cup on the line, for example. Is all of this making sense?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So that, that concept, was gold dust to me, because it made me realize that I had been working on too broad a range of moves. I've been working on all of these fast footwork drills, and all I needed to do was identify the situations where you needed to move in the game the most, and train, and what's turned out to be 7 moves in the Maestro series, but 7 moves going only one way to come out on the strong foot, which goes against traditional soccer coaching.
Yeah, because they don't do 2 feet.
Every coach will tell you that, and it's absolute bull, because none of the great players were particularly 2-footed. And, this was studied in the 1994 World Cup or the 1998 one of the two, by a group of English phys ed students, and they counted every single touch and the degree of difficulty that they should allocate to that touch. And the amount of touches taken with the strong foot compared to the weak foot was 92 to 96% strong foot before adjusted for degree of difficulty. I mean, that's 1 in 20.
Yeah.
When adjusted for the degree of difficulty, it's even higher. And so this is at the highest level of the game in the World Cup. And it's a shocking statistic.
Yeah.
But it's a complete fallacy that coaches should tell players to develop their weak foot as much as the strong foot. Now, as I've pointed out, we develop both feet to an incredible degree in our boxes because you do not have time to use your strong foot.
Yeah, you have to use your weak. Yeah.
On 30-40% of the rebounds. So you have to take a swing at it with your weak foot. So whilst we believe in developing the strong foot wherever we do have a choice, we develop every player in our program to have the best weak foot in Kansas City.
Yeah.
Because
without actually forcing people to use their weak foot. It just happens naturally.
You have no option.
Yeah.
You can't change your body's composition to get your strong foot on the ball if the ball is coming to your weak foot. You know, and you just won't hit a viable shot if you try and do that. So you have to take it with your weak foot on regular occasions. And in our boxes, the number of goals scored by rolling balls or bouncing balls is 60-40. 60 rolling balls, 40 bouncing balls. And so in our boxes, it's virtually exactly that percentage. 40 because of the way in which the ball comes off of the boards. So rollouts are just 40% of the shots you take.
Yeah.
60 are dropping or bouncing balls. So we've got almost a perfect combination of what occurs in the professional game in the penalty area. you know, and this is all environmental. It's like me growing up playing chess. I
Yeah.
became good simply by just playing,
Hmm.
being in the right environment so that I didn't ever have to take the ball and wait a minute, going and getting the ball, bringing it back and setting it up for a shot, you
Yeah.
know, because I could just hit it and hit it and hit it. And if you walk into our facility when we're doing a block, a concentrated mass of shooting, where the whole club is working on shooting for 3.5 months at the same time, because it's set up for that. If you walk into our facility at that during those 3.5 months, it's like you've walked into the Battle of Trafalgar, where the ships are 30, 40 yards apart, and they're firing cannonballs into each other.
Yeah, and it sounds so loud. Like it's just like wham, wham, wham. They're all hitting the walls, and it's just nuts.
It's a thunderclap every 2 seconds.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and I mean, if you get migraines, you don't want to come inside our facility at that,
Yeah.
when we're hitting balls.
My
You know,
my Apple Watch will say you're in a loud environment. Make sure you leave 90 decibels or whatever. It'll
yeah,
always tell me I'm in a loud environment.
yeah. Now it's not loud enough that it's going to hurt somebody's eardrums. You
Yeah.
know, but of course, we're being facetious and we
Yeah.
exaggerate.
No
You
one's
know,
going deaf. Like no one's damaging their eardrums. But by the end of the night, you're going to bed and you're still hearing wham, wham, wham. It's like in your brain. You can't get it out. So.
yeah, but it's all positive
Hmm.
because our kids become a fox in the box, and
Yep.
we've narrowed this down to where we're developing the margin of greatness on these 7 maestro skills because we only teach them to come out on the strong foot.
Hmm.
And so it's interesting, and people would say, well, the defender gets used to it. No, they don't,
Yeah.
because of the survival instinct and how each of these moves contains prefakes, that totally sell them down the road of going in the wrong direction, you
Yeah.
know and hopefully this makes sense.
No,
you know
it does.
so
Yeah.
we've developed this unique environment, and I've got to tell you the story of Ashington, England, because this, through my research, I came up with a book written by Bobby and Jackie Charlton's mother, Sissy Charlton, and another book written by a guy that grew up in Ashington about how they grew up in an environment that was street soccer friendly, you know
Hmm.
and but let me explain how this town came about, because Ashington was built on top of a coal field, and Ashington was a mine-owned town just outside of Newcastle on Tyne in northeast England.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, the rich people that had invested in building this town, wanted to bring in miners, experienced miners from other countries, from wherever they could, in order to make money. So what they did is they built nice row houses, little houses, with 2 bedrooms upstairs where mum and dad could sleep in one with a baby, maybe, and 3 or 4 kids could sleep in another, because they had big families back then.
Yeah.
And so they built these houses, and the first developments were not well designed, but between the 1910, and right before the First World War, and about 1930, they built really, really up to date modern houses that had 14-foot walls on the back end of the house, a tiny little yard, and so you'd walk out of the back door, you go through this tiny little yard. At the end of the yard was a coal bunker and a shower for the miners coming home filthy dirty,
Yeah.
and the back street was wide enough that 2 horses and carts could pass each other, because they delivered free coal to all of the mining families. And the guy that delivered it would actually put it on his shoulder and tip it into the coal hole, that they just unlatched on the street. You know,
Hmm.
they just unlatch the coal hole, and then they tip the coal in and then latch the coal hole back up, and do this all down the street on a regular basis. So the street had a 14-foot wall and wooden doors, access gates to the street, totally solid facade on both sides of the street.
Yeah.
And this became soccer development heaven for the kids, because they would come home from school during school time, or in the summers play there all day long. And and here was the interesting thing, because it was a mining community, and because shifts started all hours of the night. There were shifts starting at like 7 p.m., 11 p.m., 3 a.m. They were using their free energy and their coal. They put in floodlights so the miners would be able to walk when it was pitch black at night,
Mm-hmm.
and be lit all the way down these streets to get to the coal mine. So the kids could stay out there and play until mum called them in at night.
Wow.
I grew up where during the winter, we were done at 4:30 in the afternoon, because that's when the light went out in England.
Yeah.
And we didn't have floodlights, so we had nowhere to play when the light went out. So we got our fix in as quick as we could after getting home from school. And
Mm-hmm.
after that, it was inside to play chess for me. And so in Ashington, that wasn't the case. And during the summers, mum didn't call them in. If the kids wanted to play till 2 a.m, they could. And there's a
Yeah.
fun story involving Bobby and Jackie Charlton's uncle, Jackie Milburn, who was their mother's brother. And Jackie Milburn was the Newcastle centre striker that played lots of games for England. And bear in mind, centre striker, right?
Yeah.
And so Bobby Charlton was the next generation, because that was his uncle. And Bobby Charlton was the number 10 for England when they won the World Cup. He played that role for England, and tremendous goal scorer, could score from 35 yards.
Oh yeah.
And in those days, the ball were a little heavier and not as easy to shoot as well. And then his brother, Jack Charlton, was kind of a throwback. He was 6'3" tall. Bobby was about 5'9", and Jack was a big goose of a man. He
Mm-hmm.
scored first-class goals, than any other player in history.
Yeah.
So, and these two brothers won the World Cup in 1966. Bobby won the Ballon d'Or, world's best player, in 1966. And they both were PFA players of the year. Bobby in 66, Jack in 67. So these were recognized, and they played in the spine. Jack was the centre back. Bobby was the number 10. They played
Mm-hmm.
in spine, during the World Cup. And
Yeah.
apparently Bobby and Charlton and Franz Beckenbauer cancelled each other out in the World Cup final, because
Yeah.
they were so good at stopping each other, and neither of them could get free to score the winning goal. So England won because of Jeff Hurst's hat trick. But these were spine players, the most important players on the team.
Yeah.
And Jackie Milburn, their uncle, who benefited from the environment, was the number 9 for England. But here's the real killer stat. Go to Wikipedia, and you'll see that out of 72 famous people from Ashington, England,
Mm-hmm.
over 40 were professional soccer players at the highest level.
Wow. What's the population of that town?
It never was more than about 29,000.
Jeez.
So you've got this tiny town that developed all of these fantastic players, more than London, more than Glasgow. The biggest cities in the UK had nowhere near that type of success. Why?
The environment. The environment was set up for those kids to develop.
These kids were mining kids. They
Mm-hmm.
were boxers or they were soccer players, and it was a lot more fun kicking the ball than being punched in the nose.
Depends on who you are. A lot of people like punching people. Some
Yeah.
people are a little loose in the head and they might get hit. I don't know.
I don't know anybody that likes getting hit. And my dad was a champion boxer, and getting hit is not pleasant.
Yeah.
So in soccer, you've got to be a tough working class kid in that environment in order to survive and prosper. But Jackie and Bobby had success that nobody else had ever had in the history of the game. Two brothers, the only brothers to ever win a World Cup. So I started delving into the impact of the environment in Ashington, England. And, the coal holes were used as goals. If not the coal holes, they threw down, a satchel after school, or, a jacket they were wearing, or a jersey, and created goals across the road, not down the road, because when you went down the road, you'd had to chase balls after shooting.
Mm-hmm.
Across the road, the ball stayed in play and came right back into play after a shot,
Yeah.
And in that environment, the two skills that were absolutely the key skills were deceptive dribbling and shooting. You didn't pass around players in that tight environment. You had at best maybe 28 feet goal to goal. You know, always in shooting distance, just like in our facilities in Kansas City. You're always in shooting distance. You know, we've got age-related fields. So for the little guys, we've got little fields. We got, fields that are, 36 by 18 for the little guys. So tiny fields. For the medium ages, we got fields that are 54 by 24. And for the big guys, our fields are only 72 feet by 36 feet. So we've got these small vertical fields where you can shoot from everywhere, and that's the first demand. But then you can do a move and shoot, and that's the second demand of our coaches. So what we're doing is we're emulating the environment in Ashington, England, that created these two incredible players, who did things that other players have never done.
Wow.
And this Ashington environment was incredibly powerful. So powerful, I had to visit it and I had to see for myself. I had to stand outside the back gate of the Charlton family home, and salam, the family home, because that was defining for me. I was 8 when England won the World Cup in 1966, and that defined a big chunk of my life and helped me become absolutely obsessed with the game from an early age. And I've been obsessed with soccer all my life. So this isn't something I just decided to do because I could make money. And everything points to, when you put a kid in a small area with rebound walls, and these kids in Ashington only had tennis balls or hard, bouncy rubber balls to play with, small balls that were no bigger than a tennis ball. They didn't have soccer balls to play with because soccer balls were 18 panel, go out of round, expensive items in those days. Stitched, hand stitched, with a shoelace entry to get the bladder in and out in case the bladder burst. To puncture. So nobody used those bigger balls in this street environment. It was all tennis balls, and this is kind of interesting because a lot of people in the community know Hugh Williams, and Hugh Williams and I went to college. I brought him over here, to help develop soccer in Kansas City for All American Indoor Sports, help build British soccer camps, and Hugh's crafted a wonderful path for himself in the game. He's now a FIFA agent, and so Hugh told me about, because let me back up a little bit. We played together for British colleges. We played together for Cardiff College, which is the college we went to in South Wales, and we both played together, for the starting 11 of the country, the 4 countries representative side for British college, which was a fantastic honor, and one of the games we played against was against Stoke City, who at the time were in the EPL. And on the Stoke City team was Dave Watson. And we did not envy Hugh because he was the centre striker on British colleges. And Dave Watson was marking him. And Dave Watson was a hard man that would kill you as soon as you look at you. And Dave Watson was a big guy who was absolutely dominant in the air. He didn't win a header the whole game. He didn't win a header. Hugh completely destroyed him the whole game long. And so as I got more and more into building the Legends Club, I went back to Hugh and I said to him, and this is when we're in America, all those years later, I said, I never really asked you this, but we were all American. I said, what made you such a great header of the ball? And this is really interesting because in his house in Porthmadog in North Wales, right behind his house, there's a street called Back Snowdon Street. And Hugh and his friends played a very unusual game that I've never heard of before, where they would throw the ball high in the air, right up above them. And then as the ball came down, they would rise and head the ball to beat their friend, who was the goalkeeper, in a garage door across the street. And there were two immediately facing garage doors in a street about the width of the streets in Ashington, and they would stand out there and they would do this for hours, apparently, where they would actually be heading a ball coming directly downwards. And of course, they use tennis balls a lot, because it gets old heading a heavy soccer ball. You know,
Yeah, it
and as
gives
we
you a
know,
little headache too after a while.
well, we know these days that
Yeah.
in fact, one of my great friends who used to be a coach in our club was Scott Vermillion, who was diagnosed with CTE from all of the headed balls that he got from playing for the US national team,
Wow.
playing for DC United in the early days of MLS.
Mhm.
He died from the complications caused by CTE. You
Wow.
know, when they examined his brain. So obviously you don't want your kids heading soccer balls, and so we should be heading tennis balls. And
Mhm.
so we're going to adapt our facility to do what Hugh Williams and his buddies did, where we actually make our box soccer courts versatile, that we can actually throw the ball up to ceiling height. And as it comes down, we have to head the ball coming down vertically. But it's a tennis ball.
Mhm.
It weighs 2 ounces.
Yeah.
There's no chance of CTE.
Yeah.
Like a mosquito bite.
Yeah, literally.
It's one of my sons is a tennis pro, as well as he coaches for the Legends Club, and he's able to get me free tennis balls as they're worn out for tennis. They'll still be great for headed.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't even have to pay for my tennis balls.
There you go.
So,
Save money where you can.
So as soon as our full-time maintenance guy, Saul, who's a genius at maintenance, as soon as he's done getting our new facility open in Lee Summit, because we're upgrading from this is our third facility in Lee Summit. As soon as he's done with that, I'm going to start in building these head courts, by raising the roof,
Mhm.
to ceiling level just below the lights, so that we can actually throw the ball up and have a one-on-one battle in these courts, or even a two-on-two battle in these courts with two tennis balls going at the same time. And kids will leave practice having taken hundreds of headers.
Yeah.
And that's what developed Hugh Williams into the best header of a ball I've ever seen on television. In teams I've played with, I've never seen anybody head the ball with deadly accuracy. He would score somewhere between 60 and 70 goals in the Welsh League, which is the best league in Wales, that our college team, to this day, they still play in the Premier Division of the
Yep.
Welsh League.
They were
And
just in
Hugh,
Europe, right? Weren't they just in like the Europa League qualifiers like 2 years ago or something? I think I
yeah,
saw.
the winners of that league, TNS,
Yeah.
you know, is been for the last few years, dominant in that league, and they play in that league, international competition,
Mhm.
it's TNS have kind of dominated, but they lost their first game last week, so
Yeah.
they very rarely have lost over the last few years. So maybe the worm is turning and things are becoming a bit fairer.
Yeah.
But the point is that Hugh Williams, with his phenomenal ability to head the ball, has shown me the way to develop great headers of the ball. And we already had an area in our facility that I built specifically for the purpose of heading the ball.
Yeah.
And JC Hackler, who's on the under-16 national team, she's a tall girl. I think she's 5'9" already, and she's not finished growing yet. And she's already really dominant, and she's been picked for the US national team. And
Wow.
so she goes in there to this day and uses that area to develop her heading skills with a tennis ball. And so it's totally revolutionary what we do, and the
Yeah.
other clubs have really changed that we go up against.
Mhm.
So we may lose games because we're trying to get out of the box and do really difficult things that will make us great players. All right. But we will never, ever look like we're not the best player on the field compared to the opposition, or best players on the field compared to the opposition, because our skills are so dominant. They are so beautiful. They are so astounding, all right, that we typically, after we've had a team for a few years, we typically can be the only team voted.
Hi, my name's Andy Barney, and I'm the founder of
voted as having fantastic individual skills and being able to use those skills in combination. Does all that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid, man. I'm loving everything that you're talking about. This is amazing. Can you actually see the I've got your facility up here. Can you see the screen on what I'm
Yeah,
showing?
there's an ugly guy on it right now.
So,
Um,
Andy, this has been an absolute amazing podcast, man. You've given me so much information, and everybody here that's going to be listening to this, I'm sure, is going to be they're definitely going to be drinking the Kool-Aid as well, because they're going to see, the impact of what you've been doing here, especially in Kansas City. Andy, what is there anything you want to plug? Do you have like books or anything out there that you want to put out there? I've got your website. I went to kclegends.com. I'm showing, this video of your indoor facility and some of the training stuff, but is there anything you want to plug before we end this?
you know, uh, you know, I just want people to understand that what we do is so different and so good for children. And we play equal playing time on our teams. And I just have no time for coaches that don't play equal playing time.
Yeah.
I don't buy into this. It builds character bullshit. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. If you're putting a kid on the bench, you're destroying their self-concept. They're kids. And they don't know how to deal with being publicly embarrassed and showing that the coach does not value them. So I would say to every parent, if your kid's a bench hitter, pull them off the team, bring them to the Legends. And within a couple of years, we'll make that coach that had them sat on the bench regret the fact that he sat that player on the bench. And he'll want that player back in a couple of years. But don't go with, the guy's a mercenary. And this, it makes no sense. Even at the high school level, it makes no sense. It's state funded in most high schools. How can a funded activity actually be unfair to children? And give somebody more opportunity to grow and learn than somebody else, just perhaps because that somebody else is faster. It's necessarily more intelligent. It's just that they had the genetic gifts of speed. And so, the coach, who's not got the ability to coach great skill or tactical understanding, sticks the fast kid up front and uses the speed of the fast kid, to get breakaways and score maybe a winning goal. So the rest of the team becomes a ball server for the kid that's got speed, and this happens again and again and again. And it's only one example of ways in which coaches who are motivated by their own ego and winning games, and unfortunately, whole crowds of high school, and I've had obviously a number of kids that have played high school soccer, and whole crowds are just baying for wins, and they don't realize that kids' self-concepts are being destroyed when the environment is primarily about winning. And we're not in this to win. Inevitably, our club wins. Honestly, more than any other club in the history of Kansas City, maybe the nation, in the long run. If we keep our teams together, which because of the inequity in youth soccer, there's platforms for college exposure, that causes us to lose players. And I'm going to, I realize that we're coming to the end of our time together, but for those listeners that have stayed with us, I've got a pretty interesting story because we had a team that just a couple of years ago won a national championship. And immediately after that, the clubs in town that have the membership of the best recruiting platform came like vultures and swooped down on our team that won the only national championship in their age group at the time, which was under 13. They swooped in and they literally stole probably 11 of our best players, or 11 of our best 30 players, and they hadn't done anything to develop them, and and they just swooped in and recruited them, and they've done very well since. They've elevated their exposure, to, for example, one of those teams that 7 of our players joined ended up losing the national championship game under that platform just last month. So these players are still producing the goods for the new club that they've joined. But the sick thing is that about 6 months after these 11 players left us, I went to watch these two teams playing each other underneath that platform at the Casey Current training facility. And remember, these teams had rosters, of, probably 18 players before they recruited our 11 players. So there's 36 players, 11 players are now Legends players. At the start of the game where they were playing each other, and with our 11 players that they've recruited all started the game for these teams. So 7 on one team, 4 on the other team. What does it tell you about their coaches? Is the players that they developed through their club structure and through their philosophy, 11, half of the starting players got axed. And the vast majority of the players that were starting were midfielders and forwards, with just a couple of defenders. And those defenders were the central defenders, part of the spine. That were the Legends players. And the other players, their club players, were the satellite players, more in a, fetch it, take it midfield role, or, a defensive outside back role. So arguably, the Legends players were doing the most important job. So not only did we have, half of the starters, and what does that say about their coaches? What does that say about their club? That they can't develop their own players? And, I kid you not, if we had the platform that they have for college exposure, we wouldn't lose a player ever to the. It's only because they have, and they protect it by voting against us being part of that platform again and again and again. We know it. We've got friends at the highest level on other clubs that want us to be involved in that platform. All right. But the local clubs veto our application to be involved. And we don't want to be involved because we want to recruit players. We want to be involved so that our players that deserve to play under our banner all the way through to college can be part of that platform and get the best college deal.
Yeah.
And inevitably the players that leave us, these wonderful dribblers and goal scorers that come out of the back, go the whole length of the field, can score goals, can do all these wonderful things, within a couple of years, they've lost a significant piece of their will to dribble and shoot, because the coaches they are now playing for don't see the game the way we see it. So they're not encouraged to take people on like we encourage them. And it's sick.
It is.
It's absolutely sick. But we're not going to change. We're not going to go into, just trying to win games. We're going to be the shining light on the top of the hill. And if you want to be a great player, if you want to learn to be an incredible deceptive dribbler, goal scorer, a phenomenal passer, and wonderful at receiving, shooting and dribbling will make you all of those things. Because when you're receiving a ball, it's about touch, it's about balance, kinesthetic awareness, agility. No better way to develop those things than dribbling in a crowd. And of course, the defensive skills. If you're going up against the best dribblers and goal scorers, you have to become the best defenders. So we don't create artsy-fartsy players that are just pretty when they've got the ball. We develop tough defensive warriors, and this all leads to fantastic leadership in life.
Yeah.
So our players are great tacklers, which is, one of the other key skills. Because we make more tackles than anybody else in any other club, because we dribble more than anybody else in any other club. So you can't have a lot of dribbling without a lot of tackling. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. I mean, there's a reason why Bobby Charlton and Jackie Charlton were the center back and best, in the 10. They're probably going against each other all the time when they were kids. So one became a better defender, one became a better forward.
They probably did go against each other because Jackie is older, but Bobby was so good that he was always playing
up.
Playing with kids that were older. But at the end of the day, it's not just the coaching philosophy. It's not just the philosophy for life, which we've got we have an unbelievable leadership impact on our players, because we're asking them to play like Bobby Charlton. We're asking them to play like Diego Maradona, Pelé, Zinedine Zidane, Ronaldinho, Leo Messi, CR7. We're asking them to play like all of the greats that were regarded as the leaders on their team, and we're showing them how they get success at it. And we all should know that what we do in some areas of our lives, what we do that we're respected for, that we know we're good at, creates a mentality in us that we've got this, that we can lead. We can step on a soccer field and we can boss the other team around and the other team's players around. And this carries over into other environments. Because of my upbringing, I never felt, for example, after I left my apprenticeship that I did in the car industry for 4 years, and before I took my phys ed degree and lectured in phys ed. I worked in an office equipment and stationery company. I was a salesman. They had to change the insurance policy for me because I was 20 when they employed me. And when I interviewed, they wanted me so badly, they paid more on their insurance policy so I could drive the cars legally that they owned in their sales fleet. Where did I get that from? I got that from being involved in an environment with students at Oxford University, where we discussed at the breakfast table and the dinner table, sex, religion, and politics, all the no-nos of the day, were open season for me right from when I was a little kid all the way through. This created in me the ability to hold a thought, I'm not saying win an argument, but make sense in an argument and persuade other people. Whether you win an argument is totally subjective. But in my life, I have found ways in which to do things differently, and so it's easy to make the argument that what we're doing is better because it just is. And if you want to argue with me, I'll talk your ear off for hours, as the audience will have already realized. And I say to my coaches, call me anytime, but expect to spend 4 hours on the phone.
I did tell a couple of friends, I was like, hey, I'm going to be doing a podcast with Andy. And they said, well, I hope you have 4 hours on your, schedule for it. So, but Andy, honestly, this has been awesome. This has been great. I'd love to get you on sometime later on, maybe sometime in the spring. We could talk about kind of maybe like a yearly review. Maybe there's some changes, additions, or things that you've, added or changed throughout the year. But I just want to thank you so much for coming on and doing this podcast with me.
And before saying goodbye, I want to point out that there's so much more that we couldn't get to.
I know.
And we have our own podcast. Do you mind if I share that with you?
Go ahead and plug it. Yeah.
Okay, we've got a podcast, and when I say we, it's Andrew Clifton that played D1 at Missouri, at Drury in Springfield, Missouri, and Brad Castor, who played D1 at Long Island University. His wife Sarah, who's a counselor, and works with lots and lots of children, as from a psychological perspective, a mental health perspective, and Jaime Aldapi, who and she also played at LIU, and that's where Brad and Sarah met, was at Long Island University. And Jaime Aldapi is on the podcast, and he was on my 82-83 team. All of these people are highly intelligent, very lucid, and they fully understand the Legends philosophy because they lived it as kids. We have a bit of fun. There's always some jokes that we tell, and there's always a sense of humor about it. So, a lot of people tell us our public podcasts are not the dry, boring ones like other people's usually are. So, it's worth dialing in. Coaching Inside the Box is the name of the podcast. It's available on all the leading podcast servers. So,
yep. I think
thank you so much.
Follow it on Spotify. So,
yeah, I really appreciate you bringing me on, Bridget, because anything we can do to spread the word that we're doing something that's so superior to what other clubs are doing, it's just crazy that other people would even sign their kids up for another club program. Frankly,
I'm really enjoying coaching for the Legends. We've had 2 games now. I will say we have won both, but not because, just because, we want to win, but because our kids are doing the things that you're preaching and it's working. So I just want to say that I'm really enjoying it. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Everyone that I've met that's talked about you, they like what you're doing. So you're doing the right thing, man. A lot of people are noticing.
if you continue with the 100% winning record, you need to play up. You need to lose.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. The first game was we dominated a little bit. The second game was a little closer. It was like 4-3 or something. So we're definitely at about the level that we're at. But we'll see how the season goes. I think we'll probably move up. So
yeah, and that's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize. It's not about the player's ego. It's not about the parents' ego. Play at the level where,
challenging the players.
yeah, play at the level where you get a 50-50 record.
Yeah.
And gradually move up when you need to as you get better and better and better. You're always climbing, but you're never winning a championship. And we enter tournaments at at the level that we're supposed, that people think we should enter, and we win, tons of tournaments. But not the reason that we enter. We're trying to get the best experience developmentally for our players. And so winning is the last thing that anybody should consider when they're trying to develop people.
Absolutely. Hey, if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. So you got to always challenge yourself for sure.
Yeah, you got to lose. You got to lose to develop the maximum of your potential.
Absolutely.
No question.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Andy. I'm going to go ahead and end this here. Thanks again for doing this, man. Have a good night.
All right. Thanks, Bridger, and you.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Thank you so much for listening to the On the Pitch podcast. Make sure to follow us on Spotify, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us also on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.